Hello everybody, and in this video we're going to be talking about the digestive system. So to start out, let's first talk about what the function of the digestive system is. So as you can see here, the function of the digestive system is to convert food into simpler molecules that can be used by the cells of the body, and it's also to absorb nutrients. So if we break this down a little bit, we already know from our macromolecule unit, where we say convert food into simple molecules, what we really mean is break down polymers, so things like polysaccharides and triglycerides and proteins, into monomers, things like amino acids, monosaccharides, fatty acids, and that kind of thing. And then once we have these smaller monomers, then the monomers, aka the nutrients, can be absorbed into the bloodstream and and transported to the rest of the body. So there are two different words here that you have to understand the difference between. Digestion is breaking food down, breaking it down from its polymers into its monomers, whereas absorption is absorbing those nutrients from the digestive system into the circulatory system, aka the bloodstream, so that they can be transported around to the rest of the body and used by the cells. So let's first start by looking at what organs actually make up the digestive system. So if we start up here at the top, you can see we have the mouth, which is the opening to the digestive tract, and the tongue, which is obviously in the mouth. And then surrounding the oral cavity, which is another fancy name for the mouth, there are these glands called salivary glands that produce saliva. Next, we have this big long tube right here that connects the mouth down to the stomach, and this is called the esophagus, which is spelled E-S-O-P-H-A-G-U-S. And then the esophagus connects the mouth to the stomach, which is this organ right here. So that's our stomach. Right above the stomach is the biggest organ in the abdominal cavity, right here, and that's the liver. And then right below the liver is a little tiny organ that's greenish in color called the gallbladder, which is this guy right here. And then below the stomach right here is the pancreas. And then finally we have the intestines. So we have the thicker part of the intestine that goes around the outside is the large intestine. And then the skinnier but longer portion that squiggles in the middle, that's the small intestine. I'm just going to write SI, but you should write out intestine. And then finally, the end of the large intestine is called the rectum. And then the opening to the outside of the body at the end of the rectum is called the anus. Okay, so all of these organs are organized in two main different parts of the digestive system. We have the digestive tract, and you should put in your notes is that this is the organs that food directly pass through. So when you eat food, food starts in your mouth, goes down through your esophagus, then goes to your stomach, then through the small intestines, then to the large intestine, and then finally through the rectum and out the anus. In that order, you can literally think of the digestive tract as a long tube going from mouth to anus. It's where food actually passes through while it's being broken down and absorbed. And then finally, the digestive system also has other organs that stick off of the digestive tract and eject things into the digestive tract. So they might eject enzymes into the digestive tract or saliva, as some examples. So these are called the accessory organs, and they include the salivary glands, the liver, the pancreas, and the gallbladder. So here's another picture. This one's just showing you the accessory organs. So you can see we have the salivary glands are labeled, the teeth and tongue, the liver, gallbladder, and pancreas. And again, these things are not part of the long tube where food passes. So food does not pass through these organs, but instead these organs make things, usually enzymes, that are inserted into the digestive tract and used in digestion. So the digestive tract itself is mostly made out of smooth muscle. And this is a type of muscle tissue that works for involuntary movement. So in other words, you cannot control the movement of smooth muscle. It contracts on its own without you consciously thinking about it. And then what kind of happens is smooth muscle in your digestive tract contracts in a way where it kind of contracts in waves, and that works to move food throughout your digestive tract as you digest it. So this movement is called peristalsis, this word right here. And I kind of want you to imagine if this part of the muscle contracted, and then a second later this part of the muscle contracted, and a second later this part of the muscles contracted, that would create a wave-like motion that would move food through that digestive tract as it was being broken down. So that's what peristalsis is. So in the digestive system, there are two main ways that food is broken down. So the first way is via mechanical digestion. And in mechanical digestion, the surface area of food is increased. So make sure you have that in your notes. So the way this works is basically large pieces of food are cut up into smaller pieces of food. It's important to note, and you should write this down, that bonds are not broken during mechanical digestion. We are not breaking down polymers into monomers. Instead, we're just literally cutting up food into smaller pieces. So this happens in two main locations. In the mouth, this happens via chewing, right? And in the mouth, the tongue helps to push food between teeth, and then the teeth actually grind the food up, cut it up into smaller pieces. And mechanical digestion actually happens in the stomach as well. So your stomach churns food. And what this means, if you look at this picture of a stomach here, you can see that the stomach is lined with all these different layers of muscle. And as you digest your food, your stomach, these muscles contract and relax, which mixes the food around in your stomach, again, helping to break big chunks of food into smaller chunks of food. And this process is called churning. So the second type of digestion you have to be familiar with that happens in the digestive system is chemical digestion. And you want to write down here, chemical digestion, this is where we're actually breaking bonds. This is where we're actually turning polymers into monomers. And this process is done by enzymes, our good old friend, the enzymes. So you can see there's a huge list here of all the different enzymes that are important for digestion. So you can see most of them end in ASC. So for example, the enzyme that breaks down the carbohydrate maltose is called maltase, right? ASC signifies it's an enzyme. The enzymes that break down dipeptides or aka proteins or proteases. The enzymes that break down nucleotides or nucleic acids are called nucleases. The enzymes that break down lipids are called lipases. So usually you can use the name to figure out what that enzyme is breaking down. And in this chart, you can see all of those different accessory organs we saw all produce these enzymes, and that each enzyme works best at a different pH depending on where in the body it's found. So let's look at some more information about these enzymes that do chemical digestion. So first, let's talk about the mouth. So in the mouth, this is the primary place where you're going to break down carbohydrates. In fact, the only macromolecule that gets broken down in the mouth are carbs. So the main enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates in the mouth is called salivary amylase. Amylase is anything with the name amylase in it is a molecule that breaks down carbohydrates, and then it's called salivary because this enzyme is produced by the salivary glands and then released in the mouth. Now, because the mouth has a pH of 7, this enzyme works best at a pH of 7. The next step where we do some chemical digestion is in the stomach, and we already know the stomach is very, very acidic, so any enzymes found here have to work well at very low pHs. Now the stomach is where we start to break down proteins. So we started carbs in the mouth, we're going to start proteins in the stomach. Then the enzymes that work here are an enzyme called gastrin and pepsin. And these enzymes are an exception to our rule. They do not end in ASE. However, they're still enzymes nonetheless. And hydrochloric acid in the stomach also contributes to the mechanical breakdown of proteins as well. So the next location where we get digestion is in the small intestine, and here all types of macromolecules are broken down. So we're going to finish carb digestion, finish protein digestion, but also digest lipids and nucleic acids here. And here, the pH is very basic. So any enzymes that work here have to work well in basic pHs. So there are tons of enzymes who work here. There's lipases from the previous page, the nucleases from the previous slide. We have more amylases that break down carbs. We have proteases that break down proteins. But I gave you one example of a protease, an enzyme that breaks down protein, called trypsin. So we've kind of have a problem here because we already said as food moves through the digestive tract, it goes from your mouth to your esophagus to your stomach, and then from the stomach it goes directly into the small intestines. However, we said that the stomach is very acidic and the small intestine is pretty basic. So if we're putting an acidic digested food in from the stomach into the small intestine, that's going to make the small intestine acidic. So this is going to pose a problem for any enzymes in the small intestine because they work well in basic pH. So the question is, how do we change the pH to go from acidic to basic when we move from the stomach to the small intestines? And the answer is accessory organs. They come into the rescue and help us to buffer the correct pH. So for example, one of the accessory organs, the pancreas, one of the things it releases into the small intestine as food comes in from the stomach. So the food from the stomach is going to come in this direction. And as that happens, that's very acidic, but the pancreas actually releases a base to help neutralize that incoming acidic food and to make it a more basic pH. So the enzymes that work well in basic pHs can work well in the intestines. So now let's talk about each of the accessory organs and see what they do. So the first accessory organ you have to know is the liver. And we already talked about the liver in the last unit in terms of glycogen storage. However, the function that the liver does in terms of the digestive system is the liver is where we make bile. And bile is not an enzyme, but it's just a molecule that is pretty hydrophobic. So when you put it in the presence of lipids, put it in the presence of fats, it breaks down large clumps of fats into smaller clumps of fats. And this process of breaking large clumps of fats into smaller clumps of fats is called emulsification. So we say it emulsifies fat. Now this is kind of a type of mechanical digestion because we're not breaking bonds here. We're not turning triglycerides into fatty acids and glycerol. We're just taking big chunks of fat and making them into small chunks of fat so it's easier to digest. So it turns out, even though the liver makes bile, the bile is not stored in the liver. It's actually stored in this organ called the gallbladder. So the gallbladder stores bile and releases or squirts that bile into the small intestine when food enters the small intestine. So we said that lipids are broken down in the small intestine. So first bile emulsifies the lipids, and then lipases, those enzymes that break them down, come in and break the triglycerides down into their monomers. So you can see there's a really cute cartoon right here. You can see the liver saying, "What is it, gallbladder? Can't you see I have a lot to do?" And the gallbladder says, "I make these." And then the liver's all mad because the gallbladder made stones. Because sometimes if the gallbladder stores bile for too long, it can form these hardened clumps of bile called gallbladder stones, which can be very painful. So clearly the liver is pretty mad at the gallbladder for forming these stones when it wasn't supposed to. But the gallbladder's sad because he was proud of himself. So pretty cute cartoon. So see here in this picture, you can see the gallbladder stores bile, and then when it's needed to emulsify lipids, it's released into the small intestine where it can help with digestion of lipids. So the next accessory organ you have to know is the pancreas. So again, we already know the pancreas in terms of producing insulin and glucagon. However, the pancreas does a lot of other things too. It releases pancreatic juice into the small intestine, which is that basic pH that helps to keep the small intestine at the right pH. But more importantly, it also produces a ton of enzymes. So you should make sure that you have that in your notes. Okay, so it produces basically all the enzymes, E-Y-M-E-S, all the enzymes that are needed for digestion in the small intestine. So it produces lipases and amylases, and it produces proteases and nucleases. So all those enzymes that break down food in the small intestine are made by the pancreas. So then finally, so food moves through your mouth, through your esophagus, through your stomach, through the small intestine. And finally, from there, we reach the the end of the small intestine. And after food is broken down in the beginning of the small intestine, then into monomers, then we start to absorb those monomers into the bloodstream. And this absorption occurs mostly in the small intestine. And the small intestine is really well designed to absorb monomers because you can see, instead of the surface of the small intestine just being flat like this, instead the small intestine has all these little bumps inside it. So it looks kind of like this. And this increases the surface area of the small intestine, so there's more room to absorb the nutrients. So you can see, not only are there these bumps called villi, but there are also bumps on the bumps called microvilli, which you can see in this picture right here. And this gives the inside of the small intestine more surface area, so there are more areas for the food particles to exit the small intestine, which is this part right here, and enter the bloodstream, which is on the outside of the small intestine. So the small intestine is well evolved for nutrient absorption. So then finally, after the small intestine, food passes into the large intestine, and this is where water is absorbed. So nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine, and water is absorbed into your bloodstream in the large intestine. And then finally, anything that's not absorbed, so any extra nutrients or waste, would exit the large intestine via the rectum and then exit out the anus. So that's it for this video, and I will see you in the next one.